With New Orleans Saints running back Alvin Kamara facing a potential suspension in 2023, don't worry, they've got some solid options in both free agency and the NFL draft. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering your favorite team, the New Orleans Saints, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much, as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget, we're free and available on all podcast apps and on YouTube as well. And I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter, your New Orleans Saints expert, credential member of the media, CrescentCitySports.com, USA Today Saints Wire, Tuesdays on Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. And today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by friends over at FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of the NFL. Make every moment more. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to learn more. On today's episode, looks like Alvin Kamara's trial is finally moving forward. So what does that mean for the New Orleans Saints in 2023? Who are some of the free agent running backs that are available? And of course, the draft class that has a lot of really good options for New Orleans. So the bottom line here is that Alvin Kamara has been indicted along with three others for the February 5th, 2022 incident after the Pro Bowl, in which he allegedly assaulted somebody in a hotel lobby and all this stuff. I don't want to go into the details of like what was or what wasn't, but let's talk about effectively what this means for the New Orleans Saints, because this could mean that the New Orleans Saints are without Alvin Kamara for at least 6 games in 2023. And that's the big thing to remember here. 6 games. Why 6 games? Because according to the NFL's Code of Conduct policy, a 6-game minimum suspension is usually the way that the NFL goes in terms of handing down discipline when it comes to violent acts and violent, things like assault and stuff like that. And that's kind of where this whole situation falls in. That's what the charge is. That's a version of what the charge is that like resulted in bodily harm. So it falls under that same umbrella. So for the NFL, which has been remarkably inconsistent for how it does or doesn't discipline players for years and years and years now, about as long as its own sort of tumultuous history, now faces an opportunity here to send a little bit of discipline in the New Orleans Saints way. And we kind of know how that goes, doesn't it? But I'm not going to dive into that. I'm not going to get all into that. Here's the big thing for you to know. Alvin Kamara on March 2nd will have a trial, which could be the trial, right? At that point, once the legal process has completed, then the NFL, independent of that legal process, will hand down its discipline. So even if Alvin Kamara escapes with lesser charges, is charged for the big charge here, or doesn't receive any charges somehow, as he and his representation are effectively talking self-defense in the alleged altercation, then if any of those things sort of the way that could all play out, the NFL, independent of the result of that case, could still discipline Alvin Kamara for violation of the Code of Conduct policy, getting into that altercation or alleged altercation in the first place. And so don't be surprised to see a situation in which Alvin Kamara goes into this, comes out with a lesser charge, or maybe it's settled outside of court or something like that, and that he still potentially receives discipline. And again, according to the Code of Conduct policy, when it comes to violent acts and things like that, then that's usually a minimum 6-game suspension is what the bylaws lay out. So that's what the New Orleans Saints may have to deal with going into 2023. So while they're out here looking for a quarterback and trying to figure out their defensive line and figure out their coaching staff, now you add on top of that a potential 6-game suspension minimum for Alvin Kamara. And don't forget, he's not the only one. Marcus May also has 2 outstanding charges, including a DUI case from when he was with the New York Jets, and also an altercation that he also had in a road rage incident here in New Orleans after he arrived. So he could potentially see some NFL discipline at some point this offseason as well. The thing to know about all of this from the New Orleans Saints perspective, though, this isn't a surprise. This is exactly what the Saints had planned for. They had, seen the whole situation where Alvin Kamara got, the trial got continued, and then the next hearing got continued and continued and continued. And so once all of that happened, you end up getting into this offseason knowing, okay, this is when The hearing is going to lead to a trial. The trial might get settled, and then you'll end up seeing the discipline. And that discipline could come down at some point in 2023. The sort of ideal situation for New Orleans, if we're being honest, out of all this, is that Alvin Kamara sees only a 6-game suspension, and that it's at the very beginning of the season. Because then at least you have him healthy for the latter half of the season and ready to go. I think there is something to that, but you're going to need to get help at running back one way or another, if we're being honest, for the early portion of the season. Even if Alvin Kamara is able to start the season as your running back, you still want to go out there and find the help that you need. And so for the Saints, this is not something that sneaks up on them. This is not something that they just found out on February 16th, like, oh no, we might be without our top running back for 6 games. Don't worry. This has kind of been the plan from the very beginning, and this is all kind of unfolding the way that we expected. So now you have a couple of different things that you end up looking at over on the offensive side, right? Not only are you going to look for free agent running backs, draft eligible running backs, which we'll be discussing here throughout the show today, but how does this also impact your passing game, right? Because you want to go out and find a running back that's going to be able to contribute to your passing game, that's going to be a threat in the passing game, that's going to be able to pull the attention of linebackers when he runs out to the perimeter, that you're going to be able to move and motion out and motion around and do all the things that the Saints should have been doing with Alvin Kamara early on last year, finally really got to doing toward the end of the season, December and January. And then how does this impact your wide receivers as well? So now all of a sudden, what was already a must-keep situation in Juwan Johnson becomes a little bit more important, doesn't it? Because now you want the pass game to be able to flow, and you want to have all of your weapons, the guys that you're familiar with. You want Chris Olave, you want Rashid Shaheed, you've got them, but now you really want to keep Juwan Johnson. And maybe now you do invest a little bit more at wide receiver. You do invest a little bit more at tight end. If the Saints were to sign Derek Carr, that could put them in position to then go to Michael Thomas and say, hey, we actually just want to redo and shuffle around some of those guarantees. And I know that there's some complications in there, 17th game check, being released the first day of the league year, all these other things. But they could potentially go to Michael Thomas and say, hey, we need you because we have a big hole to fill the first portion of our season now. And then you try to work things out and get that contract in a place where you can keep them around. Now, that seems unlikely, but if it's not Michael Thomas, but going out there and being able to say, hey, there's more shares now because Alvin Kamara is going to miss 6 games. And so Alvin Kamara getting 80 targets in a season probably isn't going to happen in 2023. Certainly didn't happen in 2022, and he wasn't suspended for 6 games. So there's a lot of these different pieces that end up impacting what the New Orleans Saints do on offense. But the biggest thing that gets impacted is, what does the New Orleans Saints backfield look like in 2023? And who's going to come and save them? Who's going to help it all happen? Well, there's one guy on the roster already that we shouldn't sleep on. That's Eno Benjamin. But who are the potential free agents out there that could come in and have a massive impact week 1 for the New Orleans Saints if Alvin Kamara can't go? We're going to break that down as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. In today's episode of Locked On Saints, brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel, the official sportsbook of the NFL and America's #1 sportsbook as well. And hey, the NFL season might be over, but we're only midway through the NBA season. So whether you're looking at the Pelicans odds, maybe you want to look at end of year awards like MVP, comeback player of the year, all of those things, most improved, all that stuff, you can find a whole bunch of that, including also point scorers, threes drain, a bunch of different player props you can get in on over at FanDuel as well. And if you're a new customer, it's even better because new customers get a no sweat first bet of up to $1,000. One thou in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. So that means there's no losing when it comes to that first bet. All you have to do is download the FanDuel Sportsbook app today. Don't worry, it's safe, it's secure, and it's super easy to use. Then you want to make sure you don't miss out on that no sweat first bet and that $1,000 in bonus bets that you can get back. Then you want to do that by heading over to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment count with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Hey, the New Orleans Saints could potentially be without Alvin Kamara for 6 games, at least in 2023, but they could be all right if they attack the free agent market of running backs. We got that as we continue on, and I appreciate you so much, as always, because Locked On Saints, your first listen of the day. Now, listen, the linebacker list, or linebacker, goodness, the running back list is a little modest, right? It's 2 top guys at the very, very top of this list. And that is, of course, Saquon Barkley and Josh Jacobs. And there's absolutely no reason for the New Orleans Saints to go down that rabbit hole of a big time second contract for running back, right? You don't want to invest a lot of money in this position. I get it. They already have a lot of money invested in Alvin Kamara. He's been dealing with injuries, and now he might miss almost half the season for you in 2023. So instead of that, you kind of get to some of the more modest names, but they're not awful at all. These guys could come in and have an immediate impact for New Orleans. Among my favorites is Seattle Seahawks running back Rashaad Penny. Now, he only got to appear in 5 games last year, total just in those 5 games, 170 snaps, 346 yards, and 2 rushing touchdowns with only 16 receiving yards. And I one of the reasons why I point out Rashaad Penny is because if you want somebody that's going to be able to maybe be your lead back without Alvin Kamara and rotate with somebody else, but then also be able to be a complement to Alvin Kamara when Alvin Kamara does return, a between the tackles runner like Rashaad Penny makes a lot of sense. Now, you worry about the injury history, and I completely understand that. And so maybe instead of going with a Rashaad Penny, you go with somebody else that kind of fits the mold, but hasn't been as concerning when it comes to injuries. So then I think about Miles Sanders, just played in a Super Bowl, played throughout the playoffs, appeared 17 games in 2022, rushed for 1,269 yards and 11 rushing touchdowns. He had a busy year. Will he stick around in Philadelphia, or will he command a contract elsewhere? Now, Miles Sanders is not necessarily a name that's up there with Saquon Barkley and Josh Jacobs, but with Josh Jacobs having scored 12 touchdowns, with Saquon Barkley having scored 10 touchdowns, there's a chance that Miles Sanders actually makes a decent amount of money in 2023. But for the New Orleans Saints, I think that's something that you're willing to work with. He's not a receiving threat, only 78 receiving yards. Now, maybe you can utilize him a little bit that way. 2 fumbles lost in 2022, and in previous injury concerns, but not the same. So when you look at his market value on like Spot Rack and stuff like that, you're seeing about $7 million per year. So a 2-year, $14 million deal, that's not bad at all to get 2 good years out of a good running back that's able to come in and pair up with Alvin Kamara and run between the tackles, as well as also running around, being able to get involved in the perimeter run game and all those other things. So there are some really good benefits to a Miles Sanders. The bigger question, though, is does he stick around in Philadelphia? And there's a chance that he absolutely does, right? There's a lot of good things going on in Philadelphia right now, and he could look to return to that camp and hopefully get back to another Super Bowl game in 2023. But on the other hand, when you look at a player like Rashaad Penny, one of the reasons why he's so easy to kind of project to head elsewhere is because Kenneth Walker, who they just drafted last year, turned out to be a great running back for them, as we all expected. Coming out of Michigan State, he was awesome, and then was nearly a rookie of the year. So that Seattle Seahawks situation could push Penny out. Miles Sanders could be in a situation where he wants to stick around in New Orleans. Another name that I really like that we haven't really gotten to see a lot from because he's been stuck behind Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt throughout his career is D'Ernest Johnson. 27 years old, coming out of Cleveland, appeared in 14 games, only played 35 snaps, though, in 2022. So he hasn't gotten a lot of opportunities out there. I would love to see what he's able to do being given an actual opportunity. So he's a big one that I like, but that we haven't really seen anything from. So you're projecting success for him as opposed to expecting success from him. So that might be something that shakes things up a little bit. Another name that I would love to see in New Orleans, but I just can't see him leaving Detroit, Jamal Williams. Get Jamal Williams, nerdy little took us over to New Orleans, and let him come over here and ball out. 1,066 rushing yards, 17 touchdowns in 2022, which is absolutely nuts. And just a phenomenal culture fit. But seeing him not be in Detroit just doesn't feel like a reality to me. One last name that I'll mention, Kareem Hunt, who comes with his own list of concerns, just like, the Alvin Kamara situation and stuff like that. Appeared in 16 games, 455 rushing yards, 3 rushing touchdowns, 195 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown as well. So you do a little bit of everything for you. So maybe he's a little bit more Alvin Kamara-like than somebody that partners with Alvin Kamara. And the Saints kind of already have that guy on the roster, though. And so that's where I want to kind of wrap this part up before we start looking at the draft. Don't forget about Eno Benjamin on this roster. Much like D'Ernest Johnson, we don't know, right? The same thing that I was discussing there. We've seen some flashes from Eno Benjamin. The Saints watched it happen to them on the Thursday night game against the Arizona Cardinals. He was phenomenal with the Arizona State Sun Devils. He was great. And so I do think that there is something to him still being on the roster. Remember, the Saints picked him up off of waivers last year, didn't sign him as a free agent. The reason why that's important is that when you sign somebody off of waivers, you pick up their remaining contract as is. So not only did they pick up Eno Benjamin for the remainder of 2020, but they also got that 2023 year that was still on his rookie deal, so they've got him going into next year as well. I wouldn't be surprised to see him on the roster in 2023 and getting some sizable snaps in place of Alvin Kamara if Alvin Kamara does indeed end up with the suspension that we expect he will for 6 or more games. That's another piece to where instead of maybe looking at one of those guys that can be an Alvin Kamara clone, you roll with Eno Benjamin and then you you sign yourself a between the tackles type of runner in free agency. So that's where guys like Rashaad Penny come in. Samaje Perine's one of those guys that'll be on the market. D'Ernest Johnson could be that guy, but again, that's more projection than it is expectation, and a couple of others that are going to be out there as well. So there are some good options that the Saints could potentially lean on. I really like the Rashaad Penny one. You just hope he can stay healthy, but you can sign him to a really cheap deal 1 year and then end up being able to work him off of that. You look at his most recent contract. The most recent contract that he signed was a 1 year, $5.7 million deal to stay with the Seattle Seahawks. I wouldn't be surprised to see him sign elsewhere for less than that going into 2023, and seriously could potentially end up on a veteran minimum deal because of the injuries that he has dealt with over the course of his career. But for the New Orleans Saints, they shouldn't just swing in free agency. They have to go out and draft a running back as well. And I mean draft a running back. No more of the undrafted free agent running backs. So who are the ones that you need to know? We'll break it down as we continue on and wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints. And today's episode of Locked On Saints brought to you by Ultimate Pro Football GM. You've heard me talk about this mobile game so many times. It is the game for you if you've ever wanted to be an NFL general manager, or you wanted to manage your own football franchise. This mobile game does that for you. And now, as the Locked On NFL hosts are all done competing with one another, it's your turn to compete. You can find all of that by managing everything in terms of the strategic aspects of your team, including things like hiring coaches and coordinators, trading for players, managing the salary cap, navigating the draft, scouting draft prospects. They've got everything that you could look for. My favorite thing about this game, honestly, though, is the fact that it's entirely offline and it's completely free to play, and there's absolutely no timeouts or things like that. So if you're on a plane, you're on a train, you're on the subway on the way home, you're out of the country, whatever, you've got this game and you're able to play it. It's completely offline, and that to me makes it awesome. Locked On Saints listeners are also, by the way, going to get a 100% free bonus to your franchise when you use the promo code Locked On in all caps in the game store. That's promo code Locked On in all caps. Make sure you check that out today. To download the game, just visit ultimate-gm.com or look it up in the App Store. Once again, that's ultimate-gm.com or Ultimate Football GM in your App Store. Start your dynasty today. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints. The New Orleans Saints need to draft a running back in this year's NFL draft. And when I say that, I mean it. I don't mean that they should look at undrafted guys or anything like that. That has not worked out. Tony Jones Jr. didn't work out. Abram Smith didn't work out. Draft a running back, invest in the position. And at this point, it makes a lot of sense, right? So not only is Alvin Kamara going to potentially miss more than a handful of games in 2023, but how much longer does he have in terms of his shelf life? Now, he's obviously a very durable running back. He's somebody that has missed a game here or there, but hasn't really been in a situation where he's missed a long string of games with injury on a consistent enough basis that you would start to be concerned. We just talked about Rashaad Penny being, in that class. And so I think that when you look at where Alvin Kamara is, you're simply just preparing for age at this point. And so drafting a running back here helps you right now, and it helps you in the future as well, say 2025, 2026, somewhere down the line. So do you look at some of the running backs that are available in this year's draft? There are a lot of really quality options. Obviously, the best running back in this year's class is Bijon Robinson, the running back out of Texas. Landing a guy like Bijon Robinson would be absolutely outstanding for New Orleans. I'm a little bit averse to investing a first-round pick in a running back, but hey, when you pick at 29, you can kind of sit back a little bit and go best player available, and you could select a running back at that point. Not really my way to go. The two positions that I avoid most in the first round when I think about them are running back and tight end. Tight end is just really hard to translate to the NFL level. Running back, just short shelf life, injury concerns, all those other things. But Bijon Robinson could be that guy that's absolutely worth it. And not like the Clyde Edwards-Helaire situation. I mean, actually worth it toward the back end of the first round if he makes it that far. Impressive athlete, really, really good size, 6 foot, 220 pounds. Going to run somewhere in the 4.4, 4.5 area, which is great for his size. Powerful runner, just as much as he's an elusive runner. Does a lot of things extremely well. So obviously he would be like the cream of the crop when it comes to running backs. But there's also guys that operate a lot like Alvin Kamara. So let's say that this New Orleans Saints did land a Rashaad Penny, let's say, in free agency. So they get a guy that could run in between the tackles and that, can kind of eat up some of that interior run work. But then you want somebody that's going to be able to come in and catch some passes and motion out wide for you and distract, pull linebackers out of the box and all that. Jahmyr Gibbs, the running back out of Alabama, 5'11", 200 pounds. He's going to run in that kind of mid 4.4 area more than likely. Really, really talented runner, and probably like the most sort of Alvin Kamara-like player in this year's draft, as the guy can do everything. He's a threat with the ball in his hands after contact. He's a threat with the ball in his hands after the catch. He's got good hands as well. He's a good ball tracker, does a lot of things really well. So I like Jahmyr Gibbs there a lot. If you're looking for somebody that can go kind of one-to-one be who Alvin Kamara has been. Now, if you want another power runner in this year's draft, Zach Charbonnet, the UCLA running back, 6'1", 220 pounds. He might run in the low 4.4s when he comes to the combine. He's going to be somebody that I'm going to be watching very closely. Look forward to speaking with while I'm at the combine, which I will be at the combine, by the way, just so that you know. He's done some really, really good stuff since moving over to UCLA. Really, really good size, as we just laid out, and just a whole expanse of tools, and really, really good vision as well, which of course has a lot of value. Okay, you had to know I was going to talk about him eventually. 5'10", 200 plus pounds. Let's get to Tyjae Spears. He's awesome. 63 broken tackles, over 1,000 yards after contact in 2022, rushed for over 1,500 yards. The kid's outstanding and set a Cotton Bowl record with 4 rushing touchdowns, was the star of the Senior Bowl practice week, all of that. Elite as a receiver, a very willing pass blocker as well, which is very important for the New Orleans Saints system, and obviously a very good rusher as well. So that's obviously an option for New Orleans. Fingers crossed. That's who I would love to see them get. But, any of these options would be really, really good. Okay, one other player that I want to make sure that I mention here before we wrap up today. When we talk about ideal size, you want to talk about checking a lot of boxes, all that, but kind of like soaring under the radar right now. Georgia running back Kenny McIntosh. I'm going to have my boy Damian Parson come in and talk with me here in the next couple of weeks. We'll also visit with Keith Sanchez as well from over at Locked On NFL Draft. But Damian is a running back guru, and he loves Kenny McIntosh. 6'1", 210 pounds. Again, really, really good size. He is a phenomenal pass blocker. Like, absolutely ridiculous how good he is as a pass blocker. And he's no slouch with the ball in his hands either at any point. And so I really, really, really like what a guy like Kenny McIntosh could bring. And he could be a 3rd or 4th round pick before it's all said and done. He's a patient runner, waits for everything to develop in front of him before attacking holes. That makes his vision really good. Him being a pass protector means that you can get him on the field for passing downs as well as rushing downs and take care of yourself without like tipping any tendencies or anything like that. So I really like what Kenny McIntosh would bring. A couple of other names, just make sure that you know. Israel Abanikanda, the running back out of Pittsburgh, 5'11", 215 pounds. Very consistent in terms of what he's able to do, picking up yardage, fighting through contact, as a receiver, all of those other things. Roschon Johnson, 6'2", 225 pounds, the other Texas Longhorns running back, another guy that could potentially be found in the 3rd or 4th rounds. He's one of those guys that's really good in space, but he's also very good right up the middle and attacking blockers, a power run guy that can, get you some of those tough yards and do some of the tough work as a running back as well. So if nothing else, right, and that's just a few names, like there are still more, and there are more in free agency. So the bottom line here is that, yeah, the Saints could be in a kind of a crappy position here in which Alvin Kamara is missing for 6 games in 2023 at least, but them reloading their running back room, building in place of and around Alvin Kamara is not at all out of the question, whether that's the free agency or the draft. So the Saints are at least in a good position to be able to rebuild that running back room. All right, y'all. Have a wonderful Mardi Gras weekend. I will see you Sunday night / Monday morning here on the show as we get to our first official mock draft Monday of the off season. So very much looking forward to that. We'll take a look at our own mock draft. We'll take a look at a mock draft from the Locked On NFL Draft folks, and we'll also take a look at the mock draft from Peacock and Williamson, our big NFL show here on the network, and figure out where they see the New Orleans Saints going in the 1st round and where we see the New Orleans Saints could potentially go 4-7. So we got that coming up for you on Monday. Have a fun and safe weekend. I'll be out there. So if you see me, please come by and say hi. I don't care what I'm doing. Come and say hello. I appreciate you as always. Make a Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Make sure you go and check out Locked On NFL Draft, by the way, as well. Thanks so much for making me a part of your day, a part of your routine, for saying yes to me and the show. As always, if you see me, say hi. And if you need anything else around your New Orleans Saints in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, Nola. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you living. Let me know how you momming them. And trust you, that nation. I'll holla at you.